The grand hall of the Zivran Palace was a spectacle of opulence and intimidation. Its walls, made of shimmering blackstone, reflected the eerie, pulsating light from the bioluminescent chandeliers above. At its center sat King Zarek, his imposing figure draped in the crimson robes of his station, the symbol of the Zivran Empire embroidered in shimmering gold threads across his chest. He leaned back on his throne, his talon-like fingers tapping the armrests in a rhythm that reverberated across the silent chamber. His gaze bore down on Queen Avelia, who stood at the center of the hall, her once proud demeanor eroded by the weight of the king's decree. "You have failed me, Avelia," Zarek hissed, his voice echoing through the hall. "Year after year, I have waited for an heir to secure my empire's legacy. And year after year, you have brought me nothing but shame." Avelia's violet eyes met his, unyielding despite the humiliation she faced. She stood tall, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders, a stark contrast to the fiery tones of her surroundings. "I have given you loyalty, wisdom, and counsel, Zarek. The Empire thrives not because of heirs but because of the strength of its people. Do not let your pride blind you to that truth." The room tensed, the gathered nobles exchanging wary glances. None dared to speak against the king, not even in whispers. Zarek's fury ignited, his fist slamming onto the armrest of his throne. "Do not lecture me about strength. You are a relic, Avelia, a reminder of failure. Guards! Take her away. She is no longer fit to be my queen." The guards hesitated for a moment, glancing between the king and Avelia, as if uncertain about carrying out such a drastic punishment against someone so beloved by the people. Avelia, sensing their hesitation, raised her hand to halt them. "I will go willingly," she said, her voice steady. "Not because I fear you, Zarek, but because I refuse to be a pawn in your games any longer." As the guards escorted her out of the hall, Zarek called after her, his voice cold and calculating. "Do not think you will find peace in exile. You will go to the barren world of Drakthal, where even the strongest perish. Let your wisdom save you there, if it can." The harsh winds of Drakthal howled as Avelia stepped off the transport pod, the desolation of the planet stretching endlessly before her. Jagged rock formations jutted out from the barren landscape, and the air carried a biting chill. The pod's engines roared as it departed, leaving her alone in the vast emptiness. Avelia surveyed her surroundings, her survival instincts kicking in. She had faced adversity before, though never under such dire circumstances. Her exile was meant to be a death sentence, but she refused to succumb to despair. "If this planet seeks to break me," she muttered to herself, "it will have to try harder." Her immediate priority was finding shelter. As she traversed the rugged terrain, she stumbled upon a cluster of ancient ruins, half buried in the rocky ground. The structures, though weathered by time, bore intricate carvings and symbols unfamiliar even to her. Avelia's curiosity was piqued, but survival took precedence. She cleared debris from one of the structures, revealing a sheltered alcove where she could rest and plan her next steps. Meanwhile, Captain Ethan Drake was en route to investigate the source of a series of mysterious distress signals emanating from the Zivran Empire's border territories. Ethan was no stranger to danger, having served both as a soldier and a diplomat in humanity's interstellar expansion efforts. His ship, the Resolute, cut through the void of space with precision, its sleek design a testament to human ingenuity. Ethan reviewed the mission briefing in his cabin, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Zivran Empire was known for its secrecy and hostility toward outsiders, making the distress signals all the more perplexing. Why would an empire as proud as the Zivrans send out distress calls? He mused aloud. And why in such a remote sector? His thoughts were interrupted by the ship's AI, Athena, whose calm voice resonated through the cabin. "Captain, we are approaching the source of the signal. Sensors indicate an atmospheric disturbance on the planet's surface. Proceed with caution." "Thanks, Athena," Ethan replied, donning his gear. "Prepare the shuttle for descent. I'll go down myself." The shuttle's descent was turbulent, the planet's harsh winds battering its hull. Ethan gritted his teeth as the craft's controls strained against the elements. Just as he managed to stabilize the shuttle, a sudden power surge knocked out the engines, forcing a crash landing near the ruins where Avelia had taken shelter. The crash sent shockwaves across the barren landscape, drawing Avelia's attention. She hurried toward the site, her instincts torn between caution and curiosity. As she approached, she saw a human figure emerge from the wreckage, his movements slow but deliberate. Ethan spotted Avelia and raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "I'm Captain Ethan Drake of the United Nations Star Command." Avelia's eyes narrowed, her hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger she had salvaged from the ruins. "A human," she said, her tone laced with suspicion. "What brings you to this forsaken place?" Ethan noted her guarded stance but also the regal bearing that hinted at her noble origins. "I came to investigate distress signals in this region," he explained. "But it seems I've stumbled into something far more complicated." Avelia studied him for a moment before lowering her weapon. "If you truly mean no harm, then you'll need my help to survive here," she said. "This planet is not kind to the unprepared." Grateful for her willingness to talk rather than fight, Ethan extended his hand. "Then I'll gladly accept your help, though I'd prefer to earn your trust first." Avelia hesitated before taking his hand, the gesture sparking an unspoken understanding between them. Together, they began the arduous task of salvaging supplies from the wreckage and fortifying their position in the ruins. As days turned into weeks, Ethan and Avelia forged a tentative partnership. He marveled at her resourcefulness, while she found his optimism and determination to be a refreshing contrast to the cynicism of her people. They shared stories of their respective worlds, finding common ground in their experiences of leadership and sacrifice. One evening, as they sat by a makeshift fire, Avelia confided in Ethan about her exile. "Zarek's obsession with an heir is not just about legacy," she revealed. "He fears rebellion and believes a successor will secure his power. But there's more, something he's hiding. I discovered plans for a weapon buried deep within the ruins of Drakthal. A weapon capable of bringing entire civilizations to their knees." Ethan's expression hardened. "If Zarek plans to use this weapon, it's not just a Zivran problem. It's a threat to every species in the galaxy." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant hum of approaching ships. Avelia's eyes widened in alarm. "Zarek's forces," she said. "He must know you're here." Ethan stood, his resolve unshaken. "Then we'll give them a fight they'll never forget." As the Zivran ships descended, Ethan and Avelia prepared for battle, their newfound alliance tested by the relentless force of the Empire. Together, they stood as a beacon of resilience in the face of tyranny, setting the stage for the trials that awaited them. The winds of Drakthal howled like a vengeful beast as Ethan and Avelia scrambled to fortify their position in the ruins. The faint hum of approaching Zivran ships grew louder with each passing moment. Avelia's keen eyes scanned the horizon, her hands deftly tracing the carvings on an ancient stone tablet she had salvaged earlier. "They're closing in," Ethan muttered, tightening the strap on his blaster rifle. "How many ships?" "4," Avelia replied, her voice sharp and focused. "Each carrying at least a dozen elite soldiers. Zarek isn't taking any chances." Ethan's mind raced as he assessed their options. They had the advantage of terrain. These ruins provided natural choke points and vantage points. But they were outnumbered, and their makeshift defenses wouldn't hold against sustained firepower. "We'll need to outthink them," he said, more to himself than to Avelia. "Outthinking Zarek's forces isn't difficult," Avelia said, her tone laced with both bitterness and determination. "But we need to act quickly." Ethan crouched beside her, examining the ancient tablet she had been studying. The carvings depicted a map of the ruins, with symbols marking hidden chambers and mechanisms. "This place was more than just a settlement," Avelia explained. "It was a stronghold. These markings indicate traps and defense systems buried beneath the surface." A spark of inspiration lit Ethan's eyes. "Can we activate them?" Avelia hesitated, tracing her fingers over a series of glyphs. "If I can decipher this sequence, yes. But it will take time." "Then I'll buy you that time," Ethan said, rising to his feet. He adjusted the comms device on his wrist, activating its frequency jammer. This should delay their ability to call for reinforcements. Avilia nodded, her admiration for Ethan's resolve growing despite the dire circumstances. Be careful, she said, her voice softer than before. Ethan grinned. Careful's my middle name. Well, not really, but let's go with it. The Zivran ships landed with a deafening roar, their landing gear crushing the desolate ground beneath them. The soldiers disembarked in perfect formation, their crimson armor gleaming under the pale light of Drakthal's twin moons. Their commander, a towering figure with a scarred faceplate, raised a clawed hand. Spread out, he barked, his voice amplified by his helmet. The human and the traitor queen are here. Find them. Kill the human. Capture the queen. The soldiers fanned out, their movements precise and disciplined. But as they advanced toward the ruins, the ground beneath them began to tremble. With a sudden, violent lurch, a section of the earth collapsed, swallowing two soldiers into a hidden pit lined with jagged spikes. What the? One soldier exclaimed, before the commander silenced him with a glare. It's a trap, the commander growled. Stay alert. They're using the ruins against us. From his vantage point atop a crumbling tower, Ethan watched the chaos unfold. He aimed his blaster rifle, targeting the rear flank of the advancing soldiers. His first shot struck true, sending one soldier crumpling to the ground. The second shot took out another, drawing the attention of the remaining troops. Up there! One soldier shouted, pointing toward Ethan's position. Ethan ducked behind cover, smirking to himself. Come and get me, he muttered. The soldiers advanced cautiously, their weapons trained on the tower. But as they neared the base, a hidden mechanism activated, releasing a torrent of molten sand from a concealed reservoir. The scorching wave engulfed several soldiers, forcing the others to retreat. Meanwhile, Avilia worked feverishly in the central chamber of the ruins. The ancient console before her flickered to life as she deciphered the final glyphs. The mechanisms groaned and creaked, their long-dormant systems awakening under her command. Ethan, she called into her comm device. The traps are online. Lure them toward the eastern passage. Got it, Ethan replied. He fired a few more shots to draw the soldiers' attention, then bolted toward the designated area. The soldiers pursued him, their anger overriding their caution. As Ethan reached the eastern passage, Avilia triggered another mechanism. The ground beneath the soldiers erupted, sending shards of rock and debris flying in all directions. Those who survived the explosion found themselves trapped in a narrow corridor, the walls slowly closing in. The Zivran commander, watching the chaos from a distance, clenched his fists. This is no ordinary human, he muttered. And Avilia, she's proving to be more resourceful than anticipated. He activated his comms. Deployed the heavy units. Crush them. Moments later, a squad of Zivran exosuits emerged from the landed ships. Each towering mech bristled with weaponry, their pilots shielded within reinforced cockpits. The exosuits advanced toward the ruins, their massive steps shaking the ground. Ethan's heart sank as he saw the mechs approach. Well, that's new, he muttered. He retreated toward Avilia's position, firing at the advancing mechs to little effect. They've brought out the big guns, Ethan said as he reached Avilia. Avilia glanced at the mechs on the console's display and cursed under her breath. We can't fight those with traps alone. Then we'll have to get creative, Ethan said, his mind racing. He noticed a section of the ruins marked with a unique glyph, an area Avilia hadn't explored yet. What's this? He asked, pointing to the map. Avilia examined the glyph, her eyes widening. That chamber contains an energy core. If we can overload it. Ethan nodded. We can take out the mechs and the soldiers in one go. But it's risky, Avilia warned. The core's explosion could destroy the entire ruins, and us with it. Ethan grinned. Risky's my middle name. Again, not really, but you get the idea. Avilia sighed, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the tension. Let's do it. The duo made their way to the energy core, dodging enemy fire and activating more traps to slow their pursuers. The core's chamber was a marvel of ancient engineering, its walls lined with glowing conduits that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Ethan studied the control panel, his hands hovering over the unfamiliar symbols. "Can you shut off the safety protocols?" he asked. Avilia nodded, her fingers dancing across the console. "Done. Now we just need to overload it." Ethan pulled a power cell from his gear and connected it to the core's input terminal. The core's glow intensified, its hum growing louder and more erratic. "This should do it," he said. "Let's move." They sprinted out of the chamber as the core began to overload. The mechs and soldiers, closing in on their position, were caught off guard by the sudden surge of energy. A blinding explosion erupted from the ruins, consuming the mechs and scattering the remaining soldiers. Ethan and Avilia emerged from the rubble, battered but alive. The ruins lay in ruins, their secrets buried once more. The Zivran forces were in disarray, their commander retreating with the few survivors. Ethan turned to Avilia, his expression both relieved and exhausted. "We did it," he said. Avilia nodded, a rare smile gracing her lips. "You're not like any human I've met," she admitted. "You're impressive," Ethan chuckled. "And you're not like any queen I've met. I'd say we make a pretty good team." Their victory was hard-won, but the battle had only just begun. As they gazed at the retreating Zivran ships, they knew Zarek would not stop until he had secured his empire, or destroyed them both. The neutral station of Crawley's Prime was a sprawling city of glass and steel, suspended in the void of space like a jewel in a cosmic crown. Ships of every imaginable design came and went from its bustling docks, representing species from across the galaxy. The atmosphere was one of perpetual chaos, where traders, diplomats, and mercenaries mingled, each with their own agendas. Ethan Drake and Avilia stepped onto the main promenade, their presence barely noticed amidst the sea of activity. "We're in the heart of the galaxy's crossroads," Ethan said, his gaze sweeping over the myriad of alien faces and holographic displays advertising everything from rare minerals to interstellar weaponry. "If we can't find allies here, we're in trouble." Avilia's expression was guarded. She pulled her hood over her silver hair, wary of recognition. "Zarek's reach extends even here," she said. "Some of these people would sell us out for a handful of credits." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll have to be careful." He glanced at her, noting the tension in her posture. "You okay?" "I'll be fine," Avilia said, her voice firm. "Let's focus on the task at hand." The pair made their way to a cantina nestled in one of the station's less reputable sectors. The air inside was thick with smoke and the low hum of alien conversation. A hulking reptilian bartender glanced at them as they entered but said nothing, his slit-pupiled eyes flicking back to his work. Ethan scanned the room, his gaze settling on a group of heavily armored individuals seated at a corner table. "That's our contact," he said, nodding toward a lean, feline alien with jet-black fur and piercing yellow eyes. The alien, known as Kavaris, was a prominent figure among the station's mercenary guilds. As they approached, Kavaris leaned back in his chair, his tail flicking lazily. "Captain Drake," he purred, his voice smooth and laced with amusement. "And a Zivran queen, no less. I must admit I'm intrigued." Ethan took a seat, motioning for Avilia to do the same. "We need your help," he said bluntly. "Zarek is building a weapon that could destroy entire worlds. If we don't stop him, none of us will be safe." Kavaris tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "A bold claim. And what do you propose?" Ethan leaned forward. "We're building a coalition. Fighters, ships, supplies, whatever you can spare. We'll take the fight to Zarek before he can strike." Kavaris chuckled. "And what's in it for me?" "Freedom," Avilia said, her voice cutting through the din. "Zarek's rule extends further with every passing year. If he succeeds, he won't stop with the Zivran Empire. Your people will be next." Kavaris studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "You have my attention. I'll rally my people. But you'll need more than just us." Ethan exhaled, relieved. That's a start. The next few days were a whirlwind of negotiations. Ethan and Avelia met with representatives from various factions, a coalition of traitors who despised Zarek's oppressive tariffs, a band of rebel fighters seeking revenge for their lost worlds, and even a group of scientists who had fled the Zivran Empire's grasp. Ethan's skills as a negotiator shone during these encounters. He tailored his arguments to each group, emphasizing their shared interests and the threat Zarek posed to them all. Avelia, though initially hesitant, found herself stepping into a leadership role once more. Her knowledge of Zivran tactics and her passionate speeches about unity inspired even the most reluctant allies. One evening, as they reviewed their progress in their makeshift command center, Avelia turned to Ethan. "I underestimated you," she admitted. "You're not just a fighter. You're a leader." Ethan shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "I've had a lot of practice convincing people to do the right thing. But I couldn't have done this without you." Their moment of camaraderie was interrupted by a sharp beep from the comms console. Avelia answered, her expression darkening as she listened. "It's Kavaris," she said. "One of the factions has betrayed us." The betrayal came from the Xantirians, a species of opportunistic traitors who had initially pledged their support. Unbeknownst to Ethan and Avelia, they had struck a deal with Zarek, providing him with information on the Coalition's plans in exchange for protection. Kavaris met them in the cantina, his usual smirk replaced by a grim expression. "The Xantirians sold us out," he said. "Zarek's fleet is on its way." Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "Damn it! How long do we have?" "Not long," Kavaris replied. "But there's a chance we can turn this to our advantage." Avelia frowned. "How?" Kavaris leaned forward, his voice low. "The Xantirians' betrayal isn't complete. They're hosting a delegation from Zarek's forces right now, finalizing the deal. If we strike before they finish, we can cut off the flow of information and send a message." Ethan nodded. "Then we move now. Avelia, you coordinate with the Coalition. I'll lead the assault." "No," Avelia said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Let's end this." The assault on the Xantirian enclave was swift and brutal. Ethan and Avelia led a small strike team, infiltrating the heavily guarded compound under the cover of darkness. The Xantirians were unprepared for the ferocity of the attack, their defenses crumbling under the Coalition's precision strikes. As they stormed the central chamber, Ethan confronted the Xantirian leader, a wiry alien with shimmering blue skin. "You betrayed us," Ethan said, his blaster trained on the alien. "Why?" The Xantirian sneered. "Survival. Zarek's power is absolute. You're fools to think you can stop him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then you don't know humans very well." With a single shot, he disabled the console the Xantirian was using to communicate with Zarek's forces. "Consider this your last warning," Ethan said. "Stay out of our way, or you'll regret it." The Coalition emerged victorious, but the cost of the betrayal weighed heavily on them. Resources were lost, and trust within the alliance was shaken. Ethan and Avelia knew they needed a decisive victory to rally their allies. Back on the station, Avelia pored over the data they had recovered from the Xantirian enclave. "There's a way to disable Zarek's weapon," she said. "It's risky, but it could work." Ethan joined her, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. "What do you have in mind?" "The weapon relies on a central energy core," Avelia explained. "If we can infiltrate the facility and overload it, we can neutralize the threat." Ethan nodded. "Then that's our next move. But we'll need every ally we've got." They stood side by side, their determination unshaken despite the challenges they faced. The Coalition was fragile, but it was growing stronger. And as the galaxy's disparate factions rallied behind them, Ethan and Avelia knew they had a chance to stop Zarek once and for all. The battle ahead would test their resolve, but together, they were unstoppable. The Coalition fleet gathered near the shadow of a dying star, its faint red glow illuminating the assembled armada. Ships of all shapes and sizes, human battlecruisers, Zivran defectors, rebel frigates, and mercenary corvettes hovered in formation, their crews bracing for the battle ahead. Captain Ethan Drake stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his expression grim but determined. Beside him was Avelia, dressed in light armor that symbolized her role as both a warrior and a leader. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Zarek's fleet is mobilized near the Zivran capital. If we're going to end this, it has to be now." Avelia nodded, her violet eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Our forces are outnumbered," she said. "But they don't have what we have, unity and the will to fight for something greater than ourselves." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've come this far because of you, Avelia. The people trust you. I trust you." She met his gaze, a small smile breaking through her otherwise resolute expression. "And I trust you, Ethan. Let's show Zarek what it means to face a united galaxy." The Coalition fleet surged forward, its ships darting through the void like streaks of light. Zarek's forces, a massive fleet of sleek, crimson warships, awaited them near the capital. The Zivran flagship, Eternal Dominion, loomed at the center of the formation, its massive hull bristling with weapons and shields. The opening salvo was deafening. Plasma bolts, energy beams, and missile volleys streaked across the battlefield, lighting up the dark expanse of space. Ethan barked orders from the bridge of the Resolute, coordinating strikes against key enemy vessels. "Focus fire on their destroyers," he commanded. "We need to punch a hole through their lines." The Resolute unleashed a barrage of railgun fire, its shots tearing through the shields of a Zivran destroyer. The enemy ship exploded in a fiery plume, creating a gap in Zarek's formation. The Coalition forces pressed the advantage, weaving through the chaos to exploit the opening. Meanwhile, Avelia led a strike team aboard a sleek transport vessel, their mission to infiltrate the Eternal Dominion and disable the superweapon. Her team consisted of elite fighters from across the Coalition, each handpicked for their skills and loyalty. Ethan had wanted to join her, but they both knew his place was leading the fleet. The transport vessel darted through the battlefield, evading enemy fire with expert precision. Avelia stood at the helm, her resolve unwavering. "Prepare for breach," she ordered as the ship approached the Eternal Dominion. The strike team readied their weapons, their faces grim. The transport docked with the flagship, its breaching charges tearing through the hull. Avelia and her team stormed into the ship, engaging Zivran soldiers in brutal close-quarters combat. The corridors of the Eternal Dominion were a labyrinth of sleek metal and glowing red lights, designed to disorient intruders. But Avelia knew this ship. She had walked these halls as queen. "Stay close," she said, leading her team toward the superweapons control chamber. Along the way, they encountered fierce resistance, but Avelia's knowledge of Zivran tactics allowed them to outmaneuver their opponents. Her skill with her blade, combined with her team's firepower, proved unstoppable. On the bridge of the Resolute, Ethan faced his own challenges. Zarek's forces had regrouped, their heavy cruisers bearing down on the Coalition fleet. The Resolute shuddered under the impact of enemy fire, sparks flying as systems overloaded. "Shields at 40%, Athena, the ship's AI, reported. "Hull integrity compromised." "Hold steady," Ethan said, gripping the command console. "Divert power to the forward batteries. Target their command ship." The Resolute unleashed another volley, its railguns striking the enemy command ship's engines. The vessel faltered, its systems failing, and drifted out of formation. Cheers erupted across the bridge, but Ethan remained focused. "We're not done yet," he said. "Keep pushing." Avelia and her team reached the superweapons control chamber, a massive room dominated by a glowing core of pulsating energy. The chamber was heavily guarded, and a fierce battle ensued. Avelia fought with a precision and ferocity that left even her enemies in awe. Her team covered her as she approached the core's control console. "Can you disable it?" one of her soldiers asked, firing at approaching guards. "I can do more than that," Avelia replied, her fingers flying across the console. "I'm overloading it. This weapon won't harm anyone ever again." As she worked, the chamber's defenses activated. Automated turrets emerged from the walls, forcing the team to take cover. Avelia gritted her teeth, focusing on the task despite the chaos around her. Almost there, she muttered. The doors to the chamber burst open, and Zarek himself entered, flanked by his elite guards. His crimson armor gleamed, and his eyes burned with fury. "Avelia!" he snarled. "You dare defy me?" Avelia turned to face him, her blade at the ready. "Your reign ends here, Zarek," she said. "The galaxy will no longer suffer under your tyranny." Zarek laughed, a cold, menacing sound. "You think a traitor and a ragtag band of rebels can stop me? You're a fool." He lunged at her, his strength and speed formidable. Their blades clashed, the sound ringing through the chamber. Avelia held her ground, matching him blow for blow. Her team engaged Zarek's guards, the battle escalating into a desperate struggle. On the Resolute, Ethan received a transmission from Avelia. "The weapon is overloaded," she said, her voice strained. "But Zarek is here. We need more time." Ethan's heart clenched at her words. "We're holding the line, but it's getting rough out here. Be careful." "I always am," Avelia replied, a hint of a smile in her voice. The transmission cut off, and Ethan turned his attention back to the battle. The Coalition fleet had gained the upper hand, their unity and strategy overcoming Zarek's numerical advantage. But the cost was high, ships were lost, and lives sacrificed. Ethan knew they couldn't sustain the fight much longer. "Captain," Athena said, "incoming transmission from Zarek's forces. They're requesting a ceasefire." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Patch it through." The image of a Zivran officer appeared on the screen, his expression desperate. "This is Commander Jekyllin. We've lost contact with the flagship. Our forces are in disarray. We request terms of surrender." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Stand down and power down your weapons. If you do, we'll spare your lives." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." Ethan sighed in relief but knew the battle wasn't truly over until Avelia succeeded. Back on the flagship, Avelia and Zarek's duel reached its climax. She parried his strikes with precision, her determination unwavering. "You've already lost, Zarek," she said, her voice steady. "Your fleet is in ruins. Your weapon is destroyed. Surrender, and perhaps you'll find mercy." Zarek roared, his attacks growing wild. "I will never bow to you!" he spat. Avelia saw her opening and struck, disarming him and forcing him to his knees. She held her blade to his throat, her gaze fierce. "Then you'll face justice." The chamber trembled as the overloaded core reached critical levels. Avelia's team shouted warnings, urging her to leave. She deactivated the weapon and signaled for extraction. Moments later, the strike team boarded their transport and escaped the flagship just as the core detonated. The explosion consumed the Eternal Dominion, marking the end of Zarek's reign. The Coalition fleet cheered as news of Avelia's success spread. On the bridge of the Resolute, Ethan smiled as he received her transmission. "Mission accomplished," she said. "Zarek is no more." "You did it," Ethan replied, his voice filled with admiration. "We did it." The battle ended with the Coalition victorious. Avelia was reinstated as queen, her leadership heralding a new era of unity and peace for the Zivran people. Ethan returned to Earth, his name celebrated across the galaxy as a hero who stood for justice and compassion. As they parted ways, Avelia placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "You showed me what humanity is capable of," she said. "Thank you, Ethan. For everything." He smiled, a warmth in his gaze. "The galaxy's a better place with you leading it. Don't let it down." Their paths diverged, but their bond remained, a testament to the power of unity, bravery, and hope in the face of tyranny.